So we'll be starting shortly. So while we're just getting a little bit set up and ready, I just want to make a couple of quick announcements. One announcement is that through a really nice partnership with Soupstat Consulting and the New York City Data Science Academy, we have video capture of our events that will be then uploaded onto our group YouTube channel. So I just want to acknowledge the support from Soupstat and New York City Data Science Academy. And if you need statistical consulting or data science consulting on any projects, you can talk to Soupstat. And if you want to study data science and learn data science, you can take courses through the New York City Data Science Academy. The other quick announcement is that we do have two publishing book company sponsors, O'Reilly Media and Informant, which is I guess a book publishing label that works with a few different publishers. So we have some book giveaways. So the books that we have tonight are Efficient Android Threading, Communicating Data with Tableau. This book is actually written by Ben Jones, and Ben Jones actually came and presented to this group almost 2 years ago now, but he gave a presentation on Tableau, and he's written a book about Tableau. Ask, Measure, Learn. It's about using social media analytics. And then we have a book, Analytics Across the Enterprise. It's about IBM and how IBM uses data in their day-to-day operations. So I'll put these books in the back. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a Post-it note and a pen back there. If you'd like a book, just jot down a recommendation for a speaker or a topic for a future event. Or if you have a speaker or topic idea, just jot it down on one of these Post-it notepads, and we'll take it from there. And this will all be in the back. Okay. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. So our speaker tonight is Trina Chiasson, and she's actually coming from Montreal. She organizes the Visualization Montreal Meetup group, which is basically the same as this group, except it's in Montreal. She is actually the co-founder and CEO of Infoactive, which develops web apps to help people create interactive infographics and data visualizations. She was also the 2013 and 2014 fellow of the Donald W. Reynolds Journalism Institute, where she and some collaborators developed this open source collaborative book, Data Plus Design, which is an online book about the intersection of data and information design. And that's what she's going to be speaking to us tonight about, the making of this book. And so with that, I'll turn things over to our speaker.
Thank you so much, and thank all of you for coming. It's really great to be here in New York and talking about this book. So I did something new this year that I've never done before. I crowdsourced a book for 8 months of the year. It was a side project, but it was a whole lot of fun, and the process of creating it was something that I'd never done before. I'd never written a book or written an open source book for that matter. So it was an interesting experience to work with lots of different people around the globe on this project. So how I got started on this, well, I'm a web nerd, and that means that I like to make things, and I use several different tools and resources to make these things. I design things, I write code, and I like working on creative projects that blend media and technology. And these are the things that I've been making and working on over the past couple of years. So where this all started is I started a company called Infoactive a couple of years ago, and we're a tech startup. We build a platform for making interactive infographics and data visualizations. That's my main gig. the Reynolds Journalism Institute was really interested in what we were doing with Infoactive and thought it could be applicable to journalists. And so I worked with them as a fellow last year to help newsrooms tell stories with data and see how we could help journalists work with data and visualization. Through both of those projects, I started working on data design, which we'll talk a lot more about. And then in the past couple of months, I got together with some really amazing folks in Montreal, and we organized the first data visualization meetup group. So we just recently had our third, and that's been an incredible success. And it turns out that there's a lot of interest in visualization out in Montreal, which is really exciting. So the way this all started is through an app that I've been building called Infoactive. And last year, around this time, we were hosting a Kickstarter campaign. And we were hosting this Kickstarter campaign, and I was getting messages from all over the globe from lots of different people who were interested in the project. And I received one message from a stranger in Chicago, and she says, "Hey Trina, Stats Dork from Chicago here. Do you have any plans to include tutorials for basic data cleaning and data selection techniques for users who may not have any statistics background?" And I said, you know, that's a fantastic idea. This is a really big challenge because with our system, you can put any sort of data set into it. We accept CSVs and Google Sheets, and so we see data in lots of different formats. And it's clear that a lot of our users are very sophisticated when it comes to working with data, and there are also a lot of users who are relatively inexperienced and they're not 100% sure what to think about when visualizing information. Is the source data that I'm working with any good to start with? Were the data collection techniques correct? And so I said, yes, I would love to offer tutorials. We're about 2 people. What do you think we can feasibly do? Maybe we could ask maybe 2 questions and have 2 tutorials. What should those 2 tutorials be? So we started having this longer conversation, and we realized that there was a need for a resource that could explain important data concepts in friendly and simple language that went beyond the scope of Infoactive. And because I love embarking in ginormous projects with random strangers, we decided to write a book. And so that's really how it got started. And we started with this idea, you know, not everyone, I know this is crazy, but not everyone is blessed with this ability to make brilliant data visualizations just from scratch. It takes a broad number of skills, combining those skill sets to create really great visualizations. Some of those skill sets are the ability to work with data and understand math and statistics. It's a design sense, an aesthetic sense, and oftentimes these days it's also the ability to write code and program. And finding someone who has mastered all 3 of these skill sets is very rare. And so what happens a lot of the time is you get a manager from a business that has a bunch of data, and they say, oh, what can we do with this data? I don't understand it. Why don't we give it to the designer? And the designer can make an infographic out of it. Oh, that's a great idea. So the designer ends up with Excel spreadsheets in their inbox, and they have to figure out how to turn those Excel spreadsheets into an easily digestible format, but they were never trained in school in math and statistics. And something that I find with a lot of designers is that they say, you know, I'm a creative person, I'm an artistic person, I can't do math, I can't do data. And I believe that that's a limiting belief, and I don't believe it's entirely true. I believe that a lot of them had this perspective, oh, I think in a certain way, and therefore I can't think in terms of math and statistics. But I believe that if we can explain the topics in a way that really speaks to designers, that is written in their language, that they can absorb these topics. And so that's really where I was starting from. The perspective that we had when we were starting the book was, why don't we make a resource that graphic designers can understand? We're not dumbing down the topics, but we're taking the extra time to take these complex topics and rewrite it in a way that artists can really identify with. Because the majority of materials out there, say statistics textbooks, are usually written by people with PhDs in statistics and edited by people with PhDs in statistics. And therefore, they make the most sense to people who are getting PhDs in statistics. So we really wanted to kind of break that down and change the language and make it more accessible to other types of people. And so we had a few parameters for this project. We wanted it to be free. We wanted it to be collaborative. We wanted people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different places around the world working on it. It had to be Creative Commons licensed, and we wanted it to be open source. We wanted people to build upon it. We didn't want to say, okay, we have the answer to how to solve this very challenging problem of explaining data, and we're the only ones that can do it. We really believed from the beginning that it would be better if we had input from lots of people, and if people could continue to critique it along the way and make improvements to it. So that's really where we started out. But then, there's this funny thing in that, you wouldn't believe it, but no one has written an open source book on how to write open source books. And so we had to invent this. What does it look like to write an open source book? And I've been involved in some open source software projects, but how do you take that idea and apply it to a book? So we had to think through that process as well. And a lot of the people who were contributors on the project, a small percentage of them had contributed to open source projects before. Most of them were non-technical. And so we had to use non-technical tools. While you may want to use Git, which we did use, we also relied on tools like Google Docs that were easier to learn and most people were familiar with. So the way that we started the project was with a simple survey. We said, okay, let's put the word out there and just see who's interested. And we really did not expect the type of reaction that we got. We posted a simple Google form on Twitter and Facebook and sent a few emails out. And then all of a sudden, people were sharing it with the rest of their office. They were emailing it to each other. They were retweeting, and they were spreading it around the web. And before we knew it, we had over 100 people who had filled out, and this form goes, it's a lot longer than this. We had over 100 people who had filled out this form to be a part of the project and contribute to it. And that was really exciting for us. We actually split it up into two different groups. We had a form for technical writers and editors and non-technical writers and editors. And we really viewed those two groups as being equally important because we needed people with technical expertise because the topics had to be accurate, right? We needed people that understood data and could explain it. But we also really needed people who did not understand data, who said, I haven't taken a math class since high school. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to data at all. Because it was important for these people to connect with the book, to read through the content and say, hey, this section right here, this doesn't make sense to me. And that was a clue to us to say, oh, well, that's because you just don't understand data. You probably need to read a book or something before you can get into it. No, we wanted to go back and say, okay, this doesn't make sense to you. Let's put in the extra work to explain it in a way that does make sense to you. Let's challenge the way that we're describing these topics and think about how we can reframe that conversation and really make this a more accessible topic for more people. And so we put out this call for contributors. We had a lot of responses. We said, okay, how do we start this? How do we take these 100 people and get them to write a book? What does that look like? So we started with a write-a-thon in Chicago, and Chicago was where I lived before this whole thing started. And Diana, my co-collaborator on the project, who sent the initial Kickstarter message, the statistical programmer, is also from Chicago. And so we said, okay, let's start by bringing people together in a common space in person and see what happens. And so the Reynolds Journalism Institute was also a sponsor of this project. So they sponsored our write-a-thon, which we held at a community space in Chicago, and about 20 people showed up. We had a couple of speakers, and we split up into groups and actually started writing and digging into chapters and trying to see how it worked when we put people into little groups and had them start writing. And after that experience of actually kicking things off and kind of understanding what roles were needed to write the different chapters, Diana and I took the entire next day and sat down in a coffee shop and read through every application that we received. And they were lengthy. We were really impressed by the amount of detail that people put in about their backgrounds and their experience and why they were interested in being involved in the project. And so we went through all of the applications, and we started fitting people together. So we started with an outline. Diana had said, okay, here are some of the topics that we want to cover in the book. Here are the different sections, and here are the suggested chapters. And we wanted to start with kind of a strict outline because we didn't want the scope of the project to creep too much. This wasn't a book that was for explaining how to do a particular type of visualization in Python. It wasn't a tutorial on how to work with D3. It was supposed to be a platform agnostic, language agnostic guide to thinking about data and thinking about the design process. And so we really wanted to start with a strict outline of different chapters. And so we went through the different applications and we said, okay, this person has experience in this field and they'd probably be good at writing this chapter. And we literally just matched people up to the different roles. And because we had so many different roles, we also said, okay, why don't we have some additional groups as well? So we had project managers who would manage certain sections and make sure that was being done. And we had different roles for editors. We had 4 different types of editors. We had technical editors who were editing for the technical accuracy of the content. So these were people who were trained in math or statistics or data analysis, and they could read the chapters and know whether or not that was technically accurate. We had editors who were editing for grammar and style and making sure that the words on the page flowed nicely, that the sentences were properly constructed. Then we had non-technical editors who were editing for the tone and feel and making sure that it's understandable to non-technical people. And fourth, we had ESL editors, people who didn't speak English as a second language, and were making sure that we weren't just writing this for Americans, that it was more broadly applicable to people in other parts of the world who might not understand our little idioms and phrases that we use and don't think twice about. And then at the end of the project, we also had editors who were looking through the entire book to make sure the chapters flowed together. Diana did a lot of work to make sure that there wasn't overlap between chapters. A lot of authors wanted to write about how much they didn't like pie charts, which is great, but only in one part of the book. It didn't make sense in the chapter about data collection, for example. So we were making sure that we weren't repeating concepts across chapters. And so that was our process for it. We really wanted to divide people up into specific roles and specific groups, not overload any one volunteer, make sure that the roles were explained and the expectations were set out. We did things like we wrote a style guide, a writing style guide, so that people could know what tone we were going for before they even started writing. Things like, should we use American spellings or British spellings? How should we do examples? Can we use examples from other parts of the web? The answer was no. We didn't want to make fun of other people's visualizations that existed on the web or point at them as bad examples. If there was an example like that, we really wanted to redo it ourselves with our own designer so that we weren't making fun of anyone's work. And then also just, the logistics of asking permission and making sure that we have the rights to use all of the content. We wanted to make sure from the beginning that people weren't using those examples. So that was laid out in the style guide. And then, like I said, we used Google Docs extensively for the project. And Diana also created a Google site to keep things organized. She had a calendar, everyone's bio. We had the sample chapter, the writing style guide, all the materials that you needed to get started. We also created some basic job descriptions for the different editing groups so that they knew what it was that they were working on. And we'd post updates on when the chapters were coming in and what things we're looking at, and when members of our large ebook team were having babies, we could make announcements, things like that. And so these are the contributors, or at least one view of the contributors. And we had about 55 ended up with about 55 contributors on the first version. I'm actually really impressed with that. I said that we started out with over 100 applications, but there are a few where nothing was written in the application, or we'd email them and they wouldn't respond. One of the things that I felt that Diana did really, really well was just keep a really tight rein on the contributors and say, okay, if you don't have time to contribute to the project, that's totally fine, and just making sure that they were responsive and that they were holding up their end of the deal or what they had promised to the project. Because the worst thing that we could have was not someone dropping out. The worst thing was to have someone who was kind of on the fence about dropping out, where we weren't quite sure whether or not their work would be reliable, but they were just kind of hanging on. So we wanted to make sure that you were in or you were out. And if you were in, we could rely on you. And having those boundaries really helped the project move forward. I think it would have been a very, very difficult project if we tried to include everyone throughout the entire process. So it worked out. And then here's another view of our contributors. I love this. So many people from so many different places. They're all from 14 countries around the globe. And just a very broad range of skill sets. We had NASA engineers, neuroscience PhDs, professional data analysts, business intelligence managers, documentary filmmakers, professors, nonprofit managers, writers, designers, and of course this guy. This guy's on every project, right? So I was really happy with the types of people that I got to work with. I learned a lot from them. We had an amateur cat yodeler on the team, and just based on personal experience, if you ever have the chance to work with an amateur cat yodeler, I highly recommend it. From the experience that I had, they were absolutely phenomenal. And one of the things that I learned in this process is not to underestimate the awesomeness of strangers on the internet. And the side note here is especially those strangers who volunteer to write books about data in their free time. They are very, very cool people. And there were several points in the project where they just really blew me away. Toward the end of the project, there was one contributor, a guy who was going to grad school in the fall, and he said, I have some time during the summer, so why don't I just volunteer full time on this project? And he was amazing for getting all of the chapters up on Git and really digging through the nitty-gritty details of all of the chapters, making sure that the source code was clean, and he's still managing our Git repo and just doing an amazing job of that. There was another case where I had a lot of kind of grunt work style projects where I felt really bad giving them to contributors because it was kind of boring stuff that just had to be done, and our contributors were all so amazing that I wanted them to all work on amazing projects. But I did have that grunt work stuff, and there was one point in the project where I had a contributor in Australia named Bill, and he kept writing me emails every now and again saying, "Hey Trina, do you have any other projects? Do you have anything else that I can work on for the book?" And at one point I said, "Well, yeah, sort of," and he said, "Feel free to send me any boring projects that you have, and I'm in the opposite time zone, and I'll have it done by the morning." I said, "Okay." And so I sent him the boring grunt work tasks, and sure enough, Bill had it done first thing in the morning. And I said, "Yes, you are awesome." There was another case where I'm going to embarrass a contributor who's here in the room with us tonight, where I had another project that involved taking tables and turning those tables from Excel tables and Google Docs and Word documents into HTML tables. So I said, oh man, this is kind of a boring copy-paste job of turning these tables into HTML tables. I had this little tool online, and so I give it to Kathy, and sure enough, she turns around, she says, "Well, I thought this might be a good time for me to hone my Python skills and write a script to do this for me." And so she wrote this script that would take all of the tables that we needed and transform them into the HTML tables that we actually needed. And it was just really cool to have that kind of inventiveness going on in the project from lots of different people. So it made me very happy to work with these people. So after we had gone through the process of getting in our drafts and editing them, having 4 different editing groups poring over them, going through additional rounds of edits, getting the second drafts in, getting all the graphics in, it was time to turn it into an actual book. And so the folks at O'Reilly had been working on this project called Atlas, which I think it's out of beta right now, but when we started it was still in beta. And it's basically a really nice tool that connects with Git, and it's you can create books with it, and O'Reilly knows their way around writing ebooks for sure. And so they gave us free access to this platform that we used to basically, you can import a project into this, and it's a nice clean WYSIWYG for people who aren't comfortable writing vanilla HTML. And so we could send contributors into Atlas, and they would write the book and edit the book, and then it builds it nicely into PDF and HTML. They have a Ruby gem that I would use to build new versions of the book, and it connects to all of our Git repos. So if an editor is working in Atlas, then their changes would be logged, and it was a really nice workflow for us. So that's what we used. And this is kind of a view of the platform. There's a nice little WYSIWYG where every time they save, it makes a commit and then saves that to our repo, which is really nice. So the book. Let's take a look at the book. So this is the book, and here it is, infoactive.co/data design. And there's a little bit of information here. There's also a contributor feedback form. So when people notice little things that are wrong with the book or suggestions or they want to contribute, they use this form to let us know. And the awesome thing about unleashing this on the internet is that we get a lot of feedback from random people who are reading the book, and that's amazing. Because I thought we had a lot of editors looking through the book. We had a lot of people working on it and a lot of people to notice the little mistakes. But there's something about having tens of thousands of people from all over the world reading through everything that you did and making comments on it that allows you to find, say, the comma that should have been a semicolon on the second image in chapter 17. And so we were getting little fixes like that from lots of people. And at first, I was kind of embarrassed that, oh man, we missed that semicolon that should have been a comma. But then I realized that it actually made people feel really good to be able to contribute in that way. And that when they're reading through the book and they find a little thing that they can improve, and they reach out to us about it, they're more connected to the project, and they really enjoyed putting in their small piece to this global project that so many people worked on over the course of 8 months. So I thought that was really cool. And so basically there's a PDF version that you can download or you can read online. We do not ask for your email. It's just click through to make it nice and simple for people to share. And we have lots of people sharing this. We have nonprofits that are sharing it with their teams, students, teachers, journalists are all over this. And we've seen a lot of people sharing it, and we still get tweets about it every single day. We released it at the end of August, and this is our version 1. So there were also a lot of chapters that didn't make it into this version of the book. There were chapters that we had been working on, but they just weren't quite ready for prime time. And we made a decision that we would rather release version 1 of the book and have it be imperfect and incomplete than wait for everything to be perfect, because we could wait 3 years perfecting everything. And eventually it got to the point where we said, all right, we'd rather allow people to have access to it as it is, and then add more chapters later. So there are chapters that are still in the works. There's one on advanced color perception theory that I'm really excited about. And then there was our longest chapter, one about different graph types and what you can use, that could have been half the book. So we said, okay, well, we're gonna have to turn this into its own section with maybe 5 different chapters into it, because it's kind of a hefty topic and we wanted to do it justice. So that is in the works as well. One of the things that surprised me actually when we unleashed this is I expected a flood of people that wanted to write new chapters for it. And I was a little bit nervous about that because I thought that we might get a bunch of ideas for really obscure topics that there's going to be a balance. But at least in terms of the main repo, it's open source, so people can fork it and do their own version of it, no problem. But for the main project, we want to keep it really focused so that it's not 60 different chapters of all kinds of random, little side pieces about data and visualization. We want to keep the book relatively concise. This one, the PDF version, is about 300 pages long. We have 18 chapters in it. But anyway, I was surprised when the comments and the feedback started coming in, not for new chapters, but for new languages. That was where the excitement was. And so now we have people translating it. We have groups that have formed translation teams around French, Spanish, Russian, and Mandarin. So those 4 are in the works right now. We'll likely also have a team doing a German translation. And who knows, as it gets going, I have a feeling that once we release these other languages, that more people will start jumping on board and wanting to translate it. And the thing that I thought is really cool about these translation teams is that they're talking not just about translating the words from English to French, but translating the cultural context as well, thinking about the examples that we use throughout the book and making them more culturally relevant. If we used a map of the US or the UK, making that a map of Quebec or France, thinking about the food examples and the people examples that we use throughout the book, and making those make sense in other cultures. And also thinking about who's a native speaker of French or Spanish or Russian could write an introduction to the book and really speak to the community, and have more of a solid connection to that community. So I thought that was really, really cool. Let's see here. And then these are some of the chapters. So you can dig in, and here there are 5 different sections. We start with data fundamentals, and then thinking about collecting data, preparing data, visualizing it, a section on what to do, and then a conclusion with the appendix and resources and the contributors as well. It is responsive for mobile devices. This is the first chapter that we started out with. One of my close advisors and friends, Alistair, who also published a book with O'Reilly called Lean Analytics, got really excited about the project, and he had his chapter ready within 2 days. Or actually, I think he had been thinking about this topic before, so he had been writing about it and then decided to turn it into a more comprehensive chapter, and then we did the graphics for it and edited the content a bit. But it was really nice to have this ready to go, because when he gave us this chapter, we said, wow, this is exactly what we want for the book. It had a really friendly conversational tone. It wasn't using big words. It wasn't, it was speaking in a way that you could really connect with. And so we actually used this chapter as an example chapter for all of the writers that were getting started. Here's an example of the tone that we'd like for the rest of the book, and that was really helpful for the writers in getting started. And then there were some things that, some editorial decisions that we made. This chapter was originally about tequila, and it was hilarious. But then we had some feedback that maybe that might not be a good idea for teachers that want to use it with middle school students, and maybe we should do something a little bit more PG. So we decided to make it about coffee instead, and we used coffee and food as a recurring theme throughout the book to try to weave the chapters together a bit more. This is one that I really love. I love this visualization right here, just really clearly laying out the different elements of a visualization and what to call them and how to think about them and how to think about the positioning of data labels and horizontal axis titles, when to use them, how to use different fonts. This has been a really popular chapter for sure. And another very popular chapter, all the chapters that are really related to design, I think have resonated with people, talking about when and where to use certain colors and fonts and what not to use, that kind of thing. This was a really interesting chapter. It has 3 authors on it. You might recognize Alberto Cairo as one of the authors. Alberto was super busy, but he really wanted to be involved in the project, and he had a lot of ideas of what not to do, because he writes about this and thinks and speaks about it on a regular basis. And so it wasn't too hard for him to really just think through what not to do when creating visualizations. And so he had just basically spoken. He spoke a chapter to us and gave us lots and lots of different examples from famous newspapers, and we took those examples and kind of translated them into something that we wouldn't have to ask for the rights to reproduce, and something that we felt was a little bit more fun and friendly. And so we ended up with a lot of people working on this chapter, and I'm pretty happy with the way that it turned out. I think it's fun to read and also gets the key points across. And then this is my favorite page in the whole book. We have the most amazing contributors. I think there's 55 on this page, but I could be mistaken. And then, and now we're probably close to 75 with all of the people working on the different translations of the book, and all the people that are joining that project. And I'm guessing that the translations are going to take about 6 months. We worked pretty hard to get this out the door, the first version, and we started with a write-a-thon in February 15th, and we released the book on August 18th. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for that many people and a project of that size, and considering that it was a side project for me. I'm pretty happy with the turnaround time, but moving forward, we're going to take a little bit of a step back and actually have it as a side project so that it's more sustainable and manageable for all of us. And fortunately, we found a number of contributors throughout the project who are so excited about it that they're still putting time in and can really help to take some of the load off of myself and Diana. And then this is the Git repo. So we have people forking it and watching it, and the first day that we put it out there, we had a pull request, and this woman had made a pull request to put arrow key navigation on the book, and that was something that never would have made it into the final book, but that's the joy of open sourcing it, is that you get that kind of community contribution. She's reading the book, and she's, oh, I would love it if I could have arrow key navigation, so I'll add that, and we pulled it in. And then you can see a lot of the most recent commits are things like typos that people found or discovered through the process of reading it. But the whole project has been a really amazing experience for me. And I'm really proud of the work that everyone did to pull it together. And I'm proud of the group that came together to make it happen. And after we published it, we had a lot of emails from contributors who said, thank you so much for including me in this project. That was really meaningful for me, and it's really cool to see it out there in the world and see people reading it and enjoying it. So that's my experience, first time writing an open source ebook. Any questions? Yes?
Were you concerned at all with copyright or plagiarism or anything like that? I mean, the topics covered seem to be in other publications, right? So could somebody copy and paste things, and was that any issue to think about?
I suppose they could copy and paste it. We definitely put in the materials sending it out to authors that that's not allowed. And there were cases where authors wanted to use particular elements from other places, so we cited those, and in cases where it was appropriate, we definitely contacted the original author of the work and asked them if it was okay for us to use it. And that was another reason why we wanted to replace all the graphics, was just to avoid any confusion. And when we replaced the graphics, except for one case where we did explicitly ask for permission, we generally replaced the graphics with completely different examples where it really wasn't, maybe it was taking from a similar idea, don't truncate your axis, but it wasn't borrowing the exact same concept or the same chart or visualization. Yeah.
So you had a section on a syllabus or references, or where when you brought something in for external.
Yeah, we have an appendix, and we also had a few librarians on the team, so they were really hardcore about making sure that everything was cited properly, and I was really happy about that because I'm definitely not an expert on that. So yeah, here's a resources section for the different chapters, and then we cited them in the chapters as well with footnotes. And O'Reilly, I'm really proud or happy that O'Reilly has done so much work in terms of online publishing and ebook publishing. They had created a resource, an HTML book resource that was basically talking about the semantics of writing an ebook in HTML. And so they had thought through all of the different complications of how do you include a footnote in HTML, and how do you reference, as a citation, or text that accompanies images in this way or that way. And so we relied really heavily on some of the work that they did to organize and structure it. Yes?
On that point, did you know going in that you were going to use O'Reilly to publish it?
I knew maybe a few weeks into the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about a massive collaborative environment is a wiki.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually composed things like that in a wiki format. And
Mm-hmm.
if you apply a little bit of HTML coding to a wiki, you can get responsive design on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
But what you put together was very much a e-book, like a book.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering whether you sort of already, when you started the project, have in mind how it was going to be presented, and that's why you chose the sort of collaborative environment that you did.
Yeah, that's a good question. We chose O'Reilly, I didn't know going into it that we were going to use them. I was introduced to them a few weeks into the project, and it seemed like a good tool for us. I think there are a few others that do similar things, but I haven't investigated them thoroughly, so don't take my word for it. I think some of the folks at Heroku were working on an ebook publishing platform, and there's another one called Gitbook that I was introduced to recently, but I really haven't looked too deeply into it. The reason why we wanted to go with O'Reilly is because it's kind of a one-click build for not just the HTML part of it, but for PDF and Mobi and EPUB as well. So it was going to be easier for us to really quickly create that PDF build. I was concerned about having to redo the entire book in InDesign with Adobe to make the PDF version and then keep both the HTML and the PDF versions in sync. So O'Reilly was really helping with that. And maybe you have resources that help you turn a wiki into a really easily designed PDF document as well.
That's
but
why I was asking you,
yeah.
because like I wanted to know going into it what you were envisioning the output being, because that's going to sort of navigate through all the choices that you had. And yeah, you would have problems like outputting from InDesign does output to PDF very easily, but there are some tweaks.
Yeah. We didn't want to keep two versions of the repo,
Yeah.
one for PDF and one for HTML. So the fact that we could have them all in one was really helpful, because even just tiny little changes from one to the other, we'd have to update the InDesign and update the Git repo, and then InDesign doesn't have version control in the same way. And it was really easy for us to use O'Reilly, so I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. Yes.
Did I understand right? We can download this for free?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Anyone else? Yes.
Are you planning to do more projects like this for like other topics? Because I think this is a great idea for data and design, but like I myself is a sort of a finance banker guy, but I'm very interested in data and design, and that's what I'll do this weekend. So I'm gonna read the book. But are you planning to do something similar? Well, I mean, you have all the expertise now to manage the projects like this. Are you gonna do something similar for the other fields? Because I think that's amazing in terms like people. I mean, you create a product that everyone can read and understand, and that's what not most publishers do nowadays. So are you planning to do something similar for different fields?
Oh man, if running a startup wasn't so time consuming, if only. I think it would be great to have more books like this, and I was kind of joking that I should write the open source book on how to write an open source book, because it worked out pretty well, and I did learn a lot along the way, so I can also point to mistakes that we made and things to avoid. So maybe someday when I have lots of time. But I also encourage people to start their own projects like this, and if you wanted any tips on getting it started, I could help for sure. Yes.
I have a quick comment and a quick question. The comment is, when I first learned about this publication, I was a bit dubious. And it wasn't until I read the book that I realized the information, the writing style, rivaled that of publications that I was paying a lot of money for. So I stood corrected, because I was amazed that a group of individuals from around the world could work collectively to create such a well-designed publication, as it were. So that's my comment. And something I learned a little bit about myself, don't judge, basically. But the other question, the other part is a question, and it's more about the cultural impact that this may have. And let me explain. By virtue of creating this publication and making it open source, you've created a tool for individuals to begin to tell their story, right? So there may be individuals that are in situations that aren't that great. They can perhaps use a tool like this to convey the situation that they're in, to afford change. Have you thought at all about, like, from a social science standpoint, the cultural impact that this may or may not have?
That's a good question. I haven't thought a tremendous amount about how much this book in particular will have an impact. I mean, I'm very glad that people are using it, but I haven't heard stories from the trenches of, hey, I shared this book with my team, and now we're starting this particular project that's based around data and design. I think it might be a little bit early for that, to be honest, because it was just released at the end of August. But I did hear about the social impact from the people that were involved in the project. We got a lot of people involved in the project where it was their first open source project that they'd ever been a part of. And for the most part, it was a very positive experience for them. And so I think it's been really cool to kind of show more people a way of getting involved in community projects where they can make an impact. And certainly, tens of thousands of people are reading the book, and so they can see how their efforts contributed to that. And then I want to make another comment on your first comment. You're not the first person to mention that, and that's totally understandable. We've had a few people say, well, okay, so you had 55 random people write 55 random chapters. How good is this? I can write a blog post and publish it on Tumblr. That doesn't mean that it's a good book. We were very fussy about quality control, and we didn't want just anyone to write any chapter, and we wanted it to be inclusive, and yet we also wanted to have certain quality standards. So we definitely vetted the people who were writing the chapters beforehand and made sure that they were technically qualified to write the chapters. We had a few published authors who were writing chapters or contributing to the book as well. And you could argue both ways. You could say, well, it's more important to have more people involved and have the experience of contributing, or you could say, well, it's more important to have that quality control so that the final output is, excellent. And so I guess we erred more on the quality control side of things. But I'd say that a lot of people from different backgrounds also had the opportunity to contribute. And even the less technical people were definitely an important part of the project in terms of making sure that content was understandable. Yes?
You mentioned that people are translating into other speaking languages.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to allow people, or have you seen other people to translate it back to a programming language? Like everything in JavaScript, everything in Python, everything in another programming language?
What do you mean?
Like you said you had examples, right, in the book?
Yeah.
I haven't seen the book first time.
Oh.
You said you have examples.
Okay.
So how would I do that example in, let's say, Python?
Oh, okay. So none of the examples in the book are based on programming, right? We have a couple of mentions in the book of some people use D3 to accomplish this task, but there's no example that shows a snippet of D3 code and how to work with that. We really wanted it to be, we didn't want it to be a programming guide, first of all. We wanted it to explain different data concepts, and the graphics are all pretty friendly, and they were actually all designed in Illustrator because that gave us the most design flexibility over it. We also made a decision to have all of the graphics as static images so that they would be compatible in PDFs, for example, or Kindles. So there are no code examples, but if there were code examples, then yes, translating them into other
But
programming
what I was
languages would be
suggesting is
great.
Maybe you could start putting side projects where they would be coded up with
Ah.
languages.
Yeah, and a journalist mentioned this to me yesterday, where he said, it would be amazing to fork a version of this and have a version for journalists. Here's data design for journalists. Here's data design for nonprofits. I could imagine here's data design for programmers, and having more specific examples that relate to people in that industry. Yes?
Question. How, just back to that point in quality control, editorially, how did you select how much to dedicate to each chapter and how much should be written, who should write it? Because I think that needs a lot of, leadership in terms of telling people what to do because there's so many people involved.
Yeah, that was really challenging, and I wish that Diana were here to help answer that question too, because she was very much involved in that process. But having that outline of chapters before we started, and then really matching people up specifically with chapters, or in a couple of cases, there were people that were well known for writing about a particular topic, and so we'd create chapters around their expertise so that the chapters made sense for what they were best at doing. But then there were also cases where we had data cleaning, data preparation, another chapter in that general section, and some of the concepts started overlapping and becoming muddy. And so Diana had to work a lot to extract the concepts into a logical flow. And so there are a couple of chapters in there that I think are technically written by 3 or 4 people, because she took a section from this chapter and put it here, and a section from this chapter and put it here, and moved this chapter here and took this section and put it there. So there was some reorganization to make sure that the flow worked. And I'd say that a lot of that is really her doing and just her caring about the flow of the concepts and making sure that it all made sense. Yes?
So the book's about preparing and visualizing information. Do you have a visual or an infographic that covers everything that's in the book on one page?
That's a very good question. The answer is no. We thought about that and we started working on it, and sadly there was just so much to do at the end of the project that we did not get that infographic out the door. But we still could. There'd be a really cool.
Open source book on open source.
Yes, after I write the open source book on open source books, we'll create an infographic about the data design book, because it would be cool because we had people from different countries and contributing in different ways who came from different backgrounds, so we could analyze the data of the contributors of the data design book, for sure. Yes?
Yeah, so this is a great topic for me. My background is book publishing, and I love to code, I love data and data visualization.
Oh,
I'm
great.
kind of in heaven right now, thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yes.
The publishing side of my brain is thinking, okay, so the major obstacle that self-publishers have or self-writers have without a publisher is cost. And you mentioned Kickstarter campaign, right?
Oh, yes, but the Kickstarter campaign was not for this book. The
Okay.
Kickstarter campaign was for our application, Infoactive, which is totally different. It's the Kickstarter campaign was for this, so it's basically a platform for making interactive infographics and data visualizations.
Okay,
Yeah.
so-
So the money, there was not much money that went into the data design project. The Reynolds Journalism Institute did generously sponsored portions of the project. So they sponsored the write-a-thon that we held, and they sponsored some of the design work because we ended up with not a lot of designers on the contributing volunteer team. And so we paid for a lot of the charts and graphics to be produced. But other than that, it was an all-volunteer project.
Thank you.
Yes? Anyone else? Yes?
From this experience, what are the one or two things you brought to your company and your entrepreneurship that you're actually applying?
Well, for one, I mean, I think that the book itself is just general goodwill for the application. They know that we're contributing to the community, and becoming thought leaders in the space has been helpful for us. And a certain number of people that go and read the book and check it out will also come and check out our app and say, okay, well, how can I apply the concepts in this book to the app itself? And another thing, it is also, we haven't done this yet, but I think it's also going to be a really good resource for us in customer support for people that are just really confused about data. So, you know, a certain percentage of people bring in data sets that really don't make sense to begin with, and our app really is not focusing on parsing people's data sets and determining whether or not the data itself is correct. It'll look at a data set and then it'll either accept it or reject it. And we'll have a few tips if it rejects it, but we can't tell whether or not you collected it properly in the first place, if there was selection bias, if, you know, a number of other factors. And so I think this will help us in helping our users figure out what kind of data they need to bring into our platform. And to know what different data types look like. A lot of people use our platform who don't know the difference between raw data and aggregated data. And now we have a chapter that explains that in depth so that you can understand why you might not be able to explore aggregated data in the same way that you can explore a raw data set, for example. Yes?
Oh yeah, just one quick question. It was just about the data sets that you used for the examples. Like, what can you just talk a little bit about how you chose those data sets and what you were looking for when you were looking for example data sets, and then are all the data set examples that you used publicly available so that anybody else could also work with that data set as well?
That's a good question. A lot of the data that we used was actually just made up. And we specifically wanted to avoid controversial topics. So there's a lot of data out there about really depressing topics. So for example, HIV transmission rates in X place. And we wanted, or, you know, there's a lot of political data out there, who voted for what candidate. And we didn't want those types of examples in the book, not because we don't think it's important, but because we wanted people to focus on the topic of learning about data and not focus on how they feel about X controversial issue. So we did make up a lot of the data and cited that, and there were some other data sets that were referenced, but all the ones that we didn't make up ourselves, we linked to in the footnotes. And the data is also available in the HTML tables. I guess it's a little bit difficult to extract if there's not a link linking directly to the raw data set. But that's a good idea. We could probably take the ones that are less accessible, especially the ones that we made up, and put those into a Google Sheet and then link that Google Sheet from the book. So I'll throw that in as a suggestion. Yes?
How do you plan to manage this if, let's say, there's a second edition, or you plan to update a specific chapters that's already there? Are you gonna fork, or are you gonna have the first edition of one link and have another one in the second edition, or are you gonna replace or add or hire new technical reviewers? Or
It's iterative, so a lot of these changes can just go into the same version. Fix this typo, fix bad link. We're just going to do a new build of the book and put the new build up online. When we add new chapters, I don't imagine that we'll fork it for version 2 and have those new chapters. The only reason why I would think we would fork it would be if there's one specific for a different group. So we'll definitely have a different fork for obviously the French or Spanish version. If we come out with one specifically for journalists or one specifically for programmers, then I could see us forking that as well. But for me personally, I think I can only manage one repo right now. Other questions? Okay.
All right, well, if there's no more questions, let's thank Trina one more time, please. Feel free to converse and chat and talk, and there's more wine, so help yourself to a drink. And if the books are back there, and also the notepads to make recommendations for speakers and topics. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.